Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is Troy with Cichlid Bros. In today's video we are discussing the Deep Water Hap, a beautiful Lake Malawi African cichlid. We're going to discuss a care guide, species profile, and in general just how to keep these fish happy and healthy. It's an awesome African cichlid that I'm looking forward to talk about, so let's dive right in. So the Deep Water Hap is an African cichlid from Lake Malawi. It is part of the haplochromis family, one of the three main categories of African cichlids from Lake Malawi. The haplochromis will be the largest of the three categories between haplochromis, peacocks, and mbuna, but when it comes to the Deep Water Hap, they're more of the common hap, and they'll stay a little bit smaller and less aggressive than some of the predatory types. The Deep Water Hap, or the Placidochromis Electra, is from that Placidochromis family, similar to the star sapphire and the Madoka whitelips, which also make great tank mates. And the Deep Water Hap has some striking, vibrant colors that you can see even when they're young, like I have here in my 135-gallon aquarium. I got this one when he was really small at about an inch, and he's probably 3.5 to 4 inches now, but he's starting to get some of that really nice greenish teal sheen across his scales. When they're young, they'll usually just be kind of white with a little bit of yellow trim to their dorsal fin, but they have really cool black bars and coloration, and when they're fired up, aggressive, or just wanting food, they'll get some of that really cool dark coloration along their jaw and underneath their body, making them just look awesome. An interesting fact about the Deep Water Hap is just how it got its common name. It was originally thought that the Deep Water Hap was only in the deepest waters of Lake Malawi, but it has been seen a lot more in the shallower areas as well. Usually it just stays near the bottom of the lake, around the sand where it's hunting and looking for prey. And another interesting fact about the Deep Water Hap in the wild is that it will kind of scour the sand where it's looking for anything in the sand or near the bottom for food. And that's why you really need sand substrate in an aquarium when it comes to the Deep Water Hap, because they will have that natural instinct of interacting with your substrate. And if you put food in the tank, they'll usually be the best at kind of scouring the bottom and getting any of the uneaten food from the others in the tank. And like all the other African cichlids, their water parameters are usually higher in pH and harder water. But if you have softer water in your area or lower pH, I would just keep things consistent, and they'll likely be able to adapt pretty easily, especially if they were tank bred. But if you do want to buffer your tank parameters a bit, you could go with something like aragonite or crushed coral as your substrate, and that would help kind of buffer those parameters a little bit and just consistently keep the parameters in check so that you're not fluctuating too much, which is really the biggest issue when chasing parameters. For temperature, I would say anywhere from 76 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit is a really good range to be in, like all the other haps, peacocks, and mbuna. And you'll just want to make sure you have a cycled tank, so that means no ammonia, no nitrite, and keeping those nitrates as low as possible, which means keeping up with your water changes, and definitely having good filtration helps with some good flow in the tank. I would usually recommend a wave maker too, as African cichlids really love to play in that flow, and it actually kind of distracts them from each other and tempering any of that aggression that you might get with African cichlids. But when it comes to aggression, the Deep Water Hap really isn't one of the most aggressive African cichlids. It's actually pretty calm and peaceful most times. It can get a little territorial during breeding, but for the most part their temperament is pretty peaceful and calm, even for a fish that can reach up to about 8 to 9 inches in length. And with that max size as adults, they obviously are pretty big. The females will stay a couple inches smaller, but they will also have some really great color. So that's a really big benefit of the Deep Water Hap, is if you have a breeding group with males and females, they'll all look great. But also if you just have a random female, it'll also get a lot of that great color. It just may stay a little bit smaller than an adult male. And I'm also showing a lot of footage of Alex 220-gallon Predator Hap tank, because he has a much larger Deep Water Hap than I do. And this guy is just a true showstopper with those beautiful colors, that tealish green color coming in with some of the stripes along its eye. It's just a truly beautiful cichlid, and he has it in a 220-gallon tank with mostly predatory haps. So you can see, even though Deep Water Hap is pretty peaceful, it can hold its own with some of the bigger hap species. But if you want a more safe approach, you could go with something like my 135, where I have peacocks and some of the common smaller haps, and they'll usually be a little more peaceful, less bullying. But really those are the two ideal tank mate setups, is either having mostly haps or having a mix of haps and peacocks. Sometimes mbuna can be a little too aggressive towards the Deep Water Hap, and they kind of require different tank setups, so just keep that in mind. Keeping the deep water hap with American cichlids is really tricky. It probably can be done if you're an experienced fish keeper, but I wouldn't recommend it, and definitely staying away from any of your smaller community fish. You could definitely have some of your Synodontis petricola or plecos, maybe even clown loaches, just some of those bottom dwelling fish that get a decent size, are tough, and can kind of hide in the nooks and crannies of maybe your rockscape, like I have here with my Synodontis petricola. I have a couple in here that kind of scour the bottom. But like the other haplochromis species, it really needs open water swimming space. So that's why I have a pretty minimal decor here. I just have a little bit of a rockscape so they can kind of get away if they need to, but for the most part they need that open water swimming space. And like I said, in this tank I just have some aragonite sand mixed with some crushed shells, and they really like to interact with that substrate, and sometimes they'll move around the sand and everything, so make sure your rocks are just pretty secure in your tank so they're not banging into the glass or anything if they fall down. But because they do get to be a pretty big size and they need the open water swimming space, I would say something like my tank is kind of the bare minimum. 125 gallons or larger is recommended for these guys, but you could probably get away with maybe like a 75 or a 90 gallon if you're doing a breeder group and you're not doing a bigger community. And when it comes to diet, just like the other haplochromis or peacocks, they prefer high protein based diets, so we definitely go with extreme monster pellets, big fella pellets, even the peewee pellets when they're smaller, and mixing in like grill flakes every now and then, and frozen food like brine shrimp or bloodworms. But you could also do something like spirulina, and they'll definitely readily eat that. They are not picky eaters at all, and they'll definitely attack food, which is really fun to watch. This is probably my favorite tank to watch eat, just because they go crazy, they splash at me, and they're just always following me around the tank because they want food. But I would just recommend not overfeeding, because that can increase nitrates in your tank and cause some issues and illnesses, diseases, things like that that you don't want. But as long as you have good filters, you're keeping up your water changes, maybe wave makers, and just in general keeping on top of your maintenance, you should have no issues keeping them. They're relatively hardy cichlids as well. And lastly, when it comes to breeding, it's pretty straightforward. The male and female in the tank will pair up. The female's a mouth brooder, so she'll take the eggs and fry into her mouth, and that's really to protect them from anyone else in the tank. But if you want the best chances of success with raising those fry, you could take out the female, let her spit the eggs or the fry out in a separate tank, and grow them out there. But in general, a deep water hap is a pretty slow grower, just like some of the other Placidochromis species, like the star sapphire and the Madoka white lips. But even as young fry, they'll start to get some pretty cool color and patterns in them. And even though they are slow growers, they'll take a while to reach their max size. It is a really rewarding fish to keep, one that should live a really long life as long as you keep some of those bare requirements in mind. And you should really enjoy keeping the deep water hap. And it's definitely one of my favorites that I can't wait to watch grow into its full maturity and reach that full size like it is in Alex's tank. I'm pretty jealous of his. But if you have any comments or questions about the deep water hap, leave those down in the comment section below. Always happy to help. Thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.